Su22UM. It's taking quite a sub-assembly approach. What's nice about Russian swing wingers is that the wing swing mechanism was mounted on a sleeve, so the pivot point wasn't actually within the fuselage. For them, it helped cope with center of gravity issues when the wing swung. If you look at something like a Tornado, you see that there's the pivot points the same level as the air intakes, so it's much further inboard, so there was a shift of center of gravity. The Russian approach was to create wing sleeves, and that's on all of the Russian swing wing aircraft, whether it's a MiG-23 or anything else. They went down this approach, which is quite nice. That gives you the entire wing assembly as a neat sub-assembly. So that's for both sides. Key thing on that is there's quite a pronounced join here, and so that's had quite a lot of filling, well, sanding and work on it already, just to blend that out. Tidy all that up, make sure I've got a nice smooth joint here, and that's sometimes running beads of Tamiya extra thin on it. Let that soak in and then resand it. Cockpit coming along okay, very nice basic assembly. The seats are quite a nice, neat little affair. I like that they're multi-part. They'll have seat belts on there. I think the ejection mechanism was by means of these two handles here, so I don't think I have to make any grab handles for them. The one in the aft cockpit will be difficult to see anyway. I'll certainly put seat belts on them. So they're quite nice sub-assemblies. Starting to pull together things like the drop tanks and well, whatever's going to be external on it. So the drop tanks and the ECM pod and the recce pod. Recce pod had quite a substantial seam on it, which has to be dealt with along here. So I've already put one layer of Mr. Surfacer on there, sanded that back. I'm going to have to do some rescribing now. And again, I did the glue and then sand here on this part. Now, as this seam is forward, so this is facing this end forward, these particular seams and joints do need to be dealt with, as I think they would be visible. Might even need a little drop of Mr. Surfacer on there just to fill that in, and this lower side is now going to get a rescribe as well, continuing over the seam lines. As I say, this is near enough the single seater, just with a little bit extra, but you know, the opening phases are going perfectly well. So I tend to often like to do things like the drop tanks early on, just to help me get the ball rolling and do the sub-assemblies, make a start on them. So that's the launch of the Su-22UM. Okay, update on the Su-22 cockpit is largely done. Seatbelts made from tape. The main cockpit colour was this Revell Light Blue, which seems quite reasonable. Maybe not quite turquoisey enough, but I find the colours I've seen, and looking at my reference material, don't have that quite that level of turquoise-ishness as other Russian aircraft. So this is quite a reasonable mid-level colour that I think works quite well. So that's coming along, wheel well painted as well. The instrument panels again, hand painted. There's no decals for these, unfortunately, so they're not perfect, but from what you'll see of them in the from outside, they're again that pale blue panel with some dots on it, which, let's face it, that's what they're gonna appear like. So yeah, blue on the cockpit interior. In preparation for adding in nose weight, I've finally chopped up some air rifle pellets. So I will be blending this with milliput and packing it in as far forward as possible underneath the rear seat there and around this area. Just keep the weight as far forward as I possibly can. And I've already done the same with nose cones, so this part I filled with again diced up air rifle pellets. So it adds a little bit of extra weight to it, and that'll go in at the front here. Once I've done the painting of the interior colours. Now there's some prominent sink marks here and here, which I'm in two minds about filling. I don't know how visible that is. Certainly pretty hard to see even when you're peering down inside. So I may leave them because they are going to be, you know, difficult to spot. But little point about doing the UM. I've been working on the wings, and on the UM, the cannon is deleted from the port side, the left side. So this part needs cutting off and then sanding and cleaning up smooth. So there was only one cannon on the aircraft on that side. That's also evidenced that there's no like, not so much flash but protective panel here at the wing root as you have on this side, which is this small like egg shape here, which is a bare metal panel, probably reflecting and providing some protection against the muzzle flash. So that's a slight difference there. This outboard pylon is a pretty poor fit, so that needs separate work fitting and sanding so it conforms nicely to the strakes on the inboard wing, inboard part of the wing, and that has to be done for both sides. In this case, I did also used combination of shim strips and filler. Slightly different approaches on the two sides. So this side I did it more with super glue, and this side I used a shim strip and Deluxe Products Perfect Putty. So we're coming along reasonably well. Just enjoying a fairly regular build. Right, another update on the Su-22. Really starting to getting it together now. Fuselage, the cockpit's in place. Instrument panels took a little bit of fiddling with. The weight has definitely worked out. She's sitting very nice and nose heavy, which is good. Fuselage seam line. Top surface, I used thin down Deluxe Products Perfect Putty. Thin it down with water, apply it with a paintbrush, clean off the excess. Works, I find, quite well. Bottom surface, where there was a bigger gap, I used thin super glue and I overlaid that with Deluxe, and it's taking a little bit of cleaning up. These upper surfaces here, I've been using just layers of Tamiya extra thin and then sand back. It's going to definitely need some rescribing. I've lost quite a bit of detail here. I'm still having problem in this area, so I think I may be putting some Mr. Surfacer on this and then take it back from there. This particular region here is giving me a bit of a problem. You can still see quite a noticeable seam line. The cockpit's going to sit in there. Seam line on this coving, but that's going to be largely hidden, so I'm not overly worried. Might put a bit of plastic card on top. This is, for me, is the main area, and around the nose as well, some seam line issues. That's going to take a little bit of rescribing as well. There's going to be, I believe that there is an anti-glare panel on the front. Not a huge amount of rescribing on this, to be honest, which is good. Far less than quite a lot of my builds. I'm also going to have to clean out where some of the surplus thin down deluxe has gone to clean that out of the panel lines, but I can do that with a pin. Still a bit of a ridge here. It's going to need cleaning up, but that's not too bad. As the recce pod's going to be on the underside, it's going to cut down the amount of rescribing I need to do there quite considerably, but in reflection I'm also going to have to rescribe this and maybe put some more detail on the underside of the recce pod and certainly tidy it up a bit. Have to look at some reference photos for that. The nose cone in its yellow has taken quite a few coats, and even having done it like this, I'm still in two minds on whether I should put on intake and FOD covers on this. I think it could look quite good for them. To make the conical one, I'll have a look through the stash for like a bomb or a rocket pod or something I can use, sand it up, and then that'll give me a conical point I can pop over this. There's also this ring to go on here. And that has the advantage that it gives me something that I can cut. I can draw my intake cover around so it fits over that, which I'm going to be reasonably happy with. I think that as an approach could work. Maybe this is a little bit far forward, but not by much. A bit messy around here. I used quite a lot of super glue because there's quite a substantial gap in this area. So I think it's coming together quite well. This is the phase I must admit I enjoy in a build, is this filling, sanding. Not so much rescribing, but I can accept the rescribing. And just working through getting the finish nice and ready before the painting phase. I'm going to have to start putting together the palette and deciding on the markings option. I'm still very much would like to do another Polish one, to be honest. I've got the checker square Polish markings. I've got plenty of them. It's the right size and font of ID numbers that I think is going to be the challenge. If I can't get them right, or I'm not happy with them, then I might just go for Russian markings. But if I can pull together something, then fair enough. I've been digging through to get more reference photos together as well. I say this area is just going to need quite a bit more sanding using the really skinny sanding stick. Namely typical. There we go. Namely, this one seems to fit quite nicely in there. So it's a bit rough, so it's not so good for doing the finishing work. But I think just spending a bit of time tidying that up will yield some benefits. The rest, fair dues. I'm a bit worried about a ghost seam here on the nose, so that's going to be more polish out the seam and then rescribe carefully. This is where I do worry about getting ghost seams popping up. Trouble is I've put Mr. Surfacer on here. When I do the sanding back, I particularly lose it all, but maybe an idea just to apply a little bit on here. I might even take masking tape, put two thin lines of it, and then sand, apply the Mr. Surfacer, and then take it back from there along that line. Big concern is not going to make much of a difference, but I can still see potential for ghost seam. So this is a good traditional build that I am enjoying, and maybe because it is also, you know, the festive season, I can just chill out and enjoy this. There's other stuff I should be doing, ironically. Apologies to the students at Coventry University. I should be marking their assignment, but anyway, I'm as I say, I am having fun with this, and it's chugging along quite nicely to give me a two-seater of the Su-22. Okay, so a bit more progress on the Su-22UM. It's come together now, the main elements. A bit of rescribing, overdone it around here. So that's way too heavily scribed, can't deny that. Canopy on and masked up, rescribing here around the nose, maybe not entirely accurate. It's not entirely accurate. I just struggled to find a scribing template that was suitable. It's a representation to replace the lost detail. Also filling and sanding down, leaving this as it is here. Tail on, and just with conventional glue and a bead of super glue as well, so it stays in foam during handling and painting. Very tempted to make intake covers, flags and tags for this. I think it'll look good like that. Recce pod, tidied up, rescribed, and a little bit of extra, looked at reference pics, so I added a little bit of extra detail to that, just make it a little bit more interesting and just improve the looks. This part's supposed to be covered in small holes, but I think it's chaff flare dispenser as well. So yeah, that'll hang nicely underneath. So yes, I'm quite happy with how this is coming on. I do rather like Italeri kits. Well, I don't fancy doing any spraying tonight. It's the 31st today. So that really represents the last bit of modelling of 2020. I'll start hitting it with some undercoats tomorrow. So progress on the Su-22. Basically, I sprayed everything as an undercoat with Cockpit Green. The reason is it's quite a chromatish colour, and I wanted something that I could see the grey against. With grey being used so extensively with plastic because it's a good neutral colour, sometimes I normally like to work off a grey base coat, but sometimes it's hard to see what you're applying. So something like, for me, Cockpit Green is a good alternative. I did as I normally do. I start with lower surfaces because they're lighter, tend to be lighter. And I've initially applied a straight up coat of XF73 Light Blue, and it wasn't blue enough. It was too light, it was too greyish. So I mixed it with a bit of sky blue. I know that's mixing a matte with a gloss, and with a matte, with a satin, but it worked quite well. and then reapplied it over, and the light blue base gave it a nice starting point, so I was quite happy with that. I've got to mask out the metal areas, the bare metal areas on the wing and around the tail. That's got to be done. I want to let this cure for a while because there's always a higher risk with the the tape bringing up the original paint. So once you get on your base coat and your lower coat, just let things cure fully before you go anywhere near masking, just to make sure that it's going to bond. And even with the great drying speed of Tamiya paints, it just makes sense to make sure you've got good cured surface. The cockpit, I'd actually painted the cockpit frame. I'd painted with this sky blue as well, just to make it pop a little bit more, to show up a little bit more. Some people say, oh, it's going to be the wrong color. I wanted a good coat. I then overlaid it with a green. I think that'll take it back a little bit. It's just that down in the tub, it's going to be quite dark. Higher up, you want your colors to be slightly lighter. Well, that's my theory anyway. So this is where it kind of stands. Yeah, that bit of overdone rescribing there, but because the upper surfaces and it's going to be the Polish Su-22 are quite dark, that'll sort of be lost in that to some extent. It'll still be a bit too prominent, but not, I don't think, excessively so. If it comes down to it, I can always put a bit of touch it with a little bit of I might actually do that with just a little bit of thin down deluxe products putty, because that is a little bit overscribed, but fair enough. The rest of it, I think it's quite happy that with the way it's going. You'll have the wavy lines on the side. Again, by overspraying slightly, it means that I'll put when I mask up the blue, it'll still leave a blue edge. And then I'll seal it up with something, maybe the light blue, just to reduce the chances of bleed through. That's always been a key issue. Now, I could well use the blue tack stroke white tack, which for me over the years has sort of blended together. I do have like a tub of this stuff that I use for masking purposes, so that'll get rolled into sausages and marked up, but because there's already the blue quite high up, I shouldn't get any inappropriate gapping, put it that way. So reasonably happy with how this is going, to be honest. It's Friday the 1st of January 2021. I should be doing other things, but I'm having fun doing this. So it's starting to look as it's supposed to look. The Polish scheme is quite dark. So it's the browns, it's the darker greens coming together. And I've got some reference pics for that that'll work off. I've got to work out what my Vallejo palette is going to be for this. Once the Vallejo is on, then it's a case of applying good old, well, for sealing up with Johnson's Klear all over. That gives me my base for my decals and my washes, and I'll really go to town with the Flory washes on this, and then building up with the and then sealing everything in with good old Tamiya matte, maybe a couple of coats of that as well, just to really take everything right back down and flatten it all out. So reasonably happy with this and the direction it's going in. Right, I've been busy painting. The main camo scheme is on now. Use reference material to get something that I believe is fairly close. Maybe the brown is a little bit light, but not by too much. Colours that I used for this were all Vallejo Model Air, Dark Earth, VS Dark Green, which is the base colour, Gunship Green, and NATO Black. Now the Gunship Green is the this lighter green shade, and against this base dark green. So masked up using white tack, as it's less likely to pull the paint off. So the drop tanks largely painted up. I may have to scribe in some panel lines on these because it's been so heavily sanded I've obliterated the detail, but I think sometimes sanding on a painted surface actually works out a bit better. Scribing on a painted surface. So these are both done. ECM pod needs tidying up, but it's largely there. And the recce pod, as I've shown before, is done. So you can see the metallic panels under the wings and the fuselage. These are going to have to get a heavy dark wash. I invariably knocked off a few bits. One of the chaff and flare pods mounts came off the back, fair enough. And invariably, as happened with the previous build of the Su-22, I managed to knock off one of the counterbalances, I believe. And the horizontal tail, I have to reattach that. Need to now start masking up the metallic around the jet pipe. So reasonably happy with how this is going. It's looking like what it's supposed to be, so now it's more detailed painting work, just to get everything at the right tones. Then there'll be decals, washes, that stage, and the final assembly. So that's where we are with it, chunking along at quite a nice rate. More progress on the good old Su-22UM. Camouflage is on. Three-tone work seems to work quite well. Sealed that up with a layer of Johnson's Klear. That then gave me a good base to apply the decals and the Flory wash. Flory wash went on first. Not really that visible on the top surfaces, but you can see the difference it's made on the lower surfaces. The decals have come out of the stash as I wanted to do the Polish version, and that was a bit fiddling about. I couldn't find the number decals I strictly wanted. I was hoping to find some of those fringed with white, but I couldn't tell on the paper until I put them on. But then I did find images of Polish Su-25s without white white edges around the numbers. So, you know, you sometimes accept a bit of variance. I do sometimes think I should have bought a separate decal set for this. The kit ones really annoys me that the stencils they gave you no locations for, and so I've used up the stencils in the kit, but when you look at photos of the actual aircraft, it's teeming with stencils. Most modern combat aircraft are. I looked at other kits references and struggled to find, you know, the right pattern. So the stencils that I put on are sort of based on what I've spotted in the photographs, what seems to make sense. But you look at the same aircraft in two different paint schemes, and the pattern on stencils, with certain exceptions, seems pretty different. So this is to busy it up, and I've dug out from the stash to find stuff I could use. So I'm in the process of busying it. That's the best way I can describe it. I'm very tempted to put intake covers on this thing, partly because I've managed to drop this thing on its nose so many times while working on it, and with the Flory wash getting in there and everything else, it's like, oh. But also because I think an intake cover will look appropriate, intake and exhaust covers, and remove before the flight tags adorning. This seemed to me to look right. The seeker head covers on the missiles. Just, you know, dress it up with that lot. Plenty hanging off it, so it has that flight line look, which is really the goal of for me of a lot of my builds. So reasonably happy with the way it's going. The Vallejo paints are proving a little bit sensitive to handling, but I've run into that before, and it's not, you know, something to be too surprised about. It's a case of just, you know, step by step on this. I'm quite happy with it. I like the way it's turning out. The underside weathering is about level. I'm going to use the Tamiya Weathering Powders as I normally do, and add a little bit more oil streaking in places. I give it some oil wash, as I say, some Flory wash as well. And it's just bringing these elements together. I'm a little bit behind in one area. Normally I'd have my undercarriage ready to be painted up, so that needs to be done and sorted out ahead of everything else. So yeah, having fun with it. The decals ironically came from the old F-16 building 148, and this is from the weapons set, the weapons decal set. You can't thankfully see the text. And it's just, as I say, to get this, to add a bit more to it on appearance. So there we are. So here we are, a bit more progress. I've applied Tamiya flat clear, and that's really bound the colours together. It's flattened it down. It's done exactly what I wanted it to do, so I'm dead happy with that and how it's come out. You know, it's just, you know, this was Vallejo on top of Tamiya, and then that covered with Johnson's Klear, and now for the flat clear over the decals, and the Tamiya Weathering Powders has just tied everything together, which is what the stuff is actually great for. Undercarriage is on. Honestly, all credit to the Russian engineers who created their undercarriage, because for the life of me, I can't work out how on earth the undercarriage doors work on an Su-22. It's just, how does this bloody thing fold? And the instructions are so ambiguous that I know they're on wrong. There is something ropey here. I may even end up taking the door off just to reposition it somehow, but it ends up getting so close to the ground, and I'm just like, you know, there's an engineer with a serious sense of humor here. So a little bit, that remains a little bit of a puzzlement. Decided to do intake covers, so I've made the aft one, which is that part, and that sort of goes into the jet exhaust. The forward one is this, start off with plastic card. That's going to fit over the front end. Now, because it's got the protruding air splitter containing, I think, quite a small radar, because this isn't really an air-to-air aircraft. I took one of a spare rocket pod cone that I've covered in Revell filler, and I've now just actually glued this onto the stick so I can turn it and use this to create a nice smooth conical shape. And then that will get glued into the center of this. So it's a way of making these rather awkward intake covers. And I think intake covers and then put the flags and tags on this, the pins that will be kept on there before flight, so that people don't go dumping drop tanks onto the deck or things like that. Now, I haven't found pins and such on the recon pod, so I'm assuming this was quite well wired into the actual aircraft. So, you know, I don't know if those could ever be ditched in flight. Bearing in mind that the aircraft's primary purpose was to bring what was on that thing back, you would sort of think, yeah, I'm not going to be... They probably didn't make them too easy to ditch in flight, even accidentally. So I don't know if there's safety flags on that. I may keep the air-to-air missiles off and just leave the pylon with the launch rail on that. I'm not entirely sure with that yet. I mean, these launch rails are there now. On the kit, it just comes with that, so I had to source the launch rail from another kit. Do a little bit tidying up, and then I realised I put it on the wrong way around, but I'm not overly worried about that. I may rework this a little bit, but I mean, a long way around as in upside down rather than back to front, thank goodness. Otherwise I'd be clashing with the undercarriage. So this may just be on there without a missile on, I'm not sure. But the ECM pod and the rocket pod, which I'm convinced is only on there to stop asymmetric avoid asymmetric thrust, where you got the ECM, where you got the jammer pod on one side and this pod on the goodness sake, this pod on the other, is so that the aircraft's not wobbling too much, so to speak. Anybody who can enlighten me on that, I would appreciate it. I just get the feeling it's sort of the rocket pod is there for balance rather than out of necessity, because really you don't want to be, when you're on a recon run, you don't want to be putting yourself at unnecessary risk by attacking things on the ground and doing rocket attacks, even though it might give you a nice warm fuzzy feeling inside, I suppose, a moment to smite something on the ground. It just seems to be there not so much for aggressive purposes but more for aerodynamic ones. So this is where we're up to with this. I do put a lot of intake covers, flags and tags on the models because so few kits come with pilot figures, and it just seems to me, we're looking at flight line images, that at an air show, where you've got people taking photographs of these things, you're not going to you might take the FOD covers off, but I think, and if there's crew chiefs out there who want to enlighten me further, I just think a lot of the time when aircraft are parked up, you're going to put your FOD covers on. You don't want to risk things getting in there, be it birds and maintenance tools and whatever else. So, you protect your aircraft. Particularly you can get bugs inside of pitot tubes. So all those delicate bits on aircraft, you do want to sort of look after. Now, I've seen images where there are plastic covers over the chaff and flare dispensers here, and I may even be tempted to make some of those. And these auxiliary intakes will probably get covers on them, and the joining cords, so that if you take off one, you remember to take off the other. Because forgetting to put stuff in, take covers off, and particularly small covers, I can think that's all too easily done. I've read cases of light aircraft pilots who leave the wind locks, which is to stop the flying surfaces, flapping about when something like a Cessna or a Piper Cub is parked up. You don't want the wind catching it and flapping it around, possibly doing damage, so they put locks on them. I've heard of them taking off with, or trying to take off with those things left on. So you try to make it as hard as possible not to forget to take off your protective covers and keep your remove before flight stuff clearly visible. That's why it's red or some other bright colour. Anyway, this is where we're up to with this. I've got to add a few aerials. I've painted up separately the pitot tubes, and I'll have to scrape a little bit of paint off and attach these. The irony is I've painted them silver, and now I'm probably going to put a splash of red on the front and attach a little bright red flag. Irony being, though, I've not seen many of these with the flags and tags on them. I think they probably would be there, but it's one of those types. There seems to be very few images of it in what I'd call a heavily parked up condition. So having a lot of fun with this, an awful lot of fun. I suppose part of me wishes I was building something civilian, to be honest, but another part of me just having real fun with this build. So this is how it's progressing, and I think the next one will really see everything hanging off there, everything attached, and it'll be the last bit of this series. So this is the completed Italeri Su-22UM, and I had real fun with this build. I enjoyed going to town on it with the weathering, the colours, and I enjoyed doing the camo scheme. Sometimes I'm not a particular fan of it, but I feel this time it worked out quite well. I put the intake covers on, the flags and tags. Maybe a few too many, maybe, but it was also nice just to give it that little bit of extra character. See the rear intake cover there, and the nose intake cover. That cone I made from a spare rocket pod that I covered in filler, then sanded and worked, and I cut discs out of plastic card and just sculpt that up. Put on the covers on the chaff and flare dispensers, and just sort of dressed it up a little bit. I'm happy enough with this. Tamiya Weathering Powders used over the Vallejo paint, and this is a real mix of my two favourite paint brands. That you have the Tamiya Vallejo on the upper surfaces, and then Tamiya on the lower surfaces with a mix of two tones on the main paint coat and some GW paints for the metallic parts. So those two, the two primary paint systems working well together. You don't mix the paints together because they are different, but they can be overlaid. Certainly the Vallejo on top of the Tamiya, and it seems works well for me. Then everything, once all the weathering and that lot is done, a coat of Tamiya flat clear just to blend everything together and flatten out the paint finish. I have to say I just did enjoy doing this. Not to say there wasn't some filling and that lot, and I had a few issues. I'd over sanded the wheels, so I ended up compensating by putting some filler on the wheels and sort of rebulking the tyres. So those have got a bit of filler on them just to take them out, because I found the undercarriage bay doors were very nearly touching the table. If I put it alongside the single-seater that I made a few years ago, you can see those differences. You put them next to each other, you can see the contrast between the two. Some things that I didn't put the silver on the pitot tubes. I'm not sure which of the two has a better camo scheme, but I think this one came out a bit better. Certainly the wavy line on the side on this always struck me as a little bit, well, too wavy. But because the decals for this were in the set, the Polish decals, and this I had to dig out Polish decals out of my spares. The 308 doesn't have a white border around it, but luckily from the reference photos and reference images I found there were some like that, where the ID number isn't quite as clear while still being in red as it is on others. Took a bit of a guess on the intake cover for the Canon. I'm not sure if the intake cover, the flag and tag for the Canon, that's a bit of a guess there, but I think it seems correct, and you probably should put some kind of Ford Cove cover over a Canon barrel. Probably should have smoothed out the vents for the Canon on the side there. I know I removed it off that side, but okay. The decals, the stencils, you can see there's no stencils on that one, or hardly any, because they don't really come with the kit. But in this one I dug out some stencils, and it was just like putting them where, from reference pics and that lot, they looked where they should be. I didn't have the exact stencil set for this. Maybe I should have bought a separate set of decals for this one. I think what I put on seems to have worked out and come out appropriately. So really, for a December into the first part of January build, I really enjoyed this. And now for the Su-22 or Su-17, whatever you want to designation use for it, I have the single seater, and now I have the two seater to go with it, and they are both Polish Air Force, so I feel they belong together. It's the kind of modelling approach I like, that in building up the collection you have two elements of it, and if there is a two-seater version of a jet, I like to have that as well as a single-seater version. So a lot of my building is focusing on these two-seater types, and a lot of the kits in my stash, because I've built so many of the single-seaters, is filling in the gaps on things like this. So I'll end it here, and there'll be the photo series after this. As I said, a lot of fun had here. So thank you for following this build video.